withdraw large amounts in cash, but rather to keep their money in their new net bank account or transfer it to another bank. To facilitate the smooth transfer of personal and account data from VBS to NetBank, VBS branches will not be able to provide cash withdrawal services from start of business on Tuesday, the 10th of July 2018 onwards. VBS branches will remain open for queries, client education, and loan repayments. Retail depositors will, however, not be able to access their funds, not even the daily 1,000 rands per individual and stocks fell, and 7,000 rands per burial, as is presently the position. Retail depositors or account holders who have more than 100,000 rands deposited in VBS will only be able to access their deposits up to 100,000 through their new NetBank accounts. The amounts in excess of 100,000 rands will remain as deposits in VBS. These deposits will remain valid, and depositors may receive a portion of their amounts above 100,000 rands in future, depending on successes in recovering loans and other assets due to VBS. This is, however, not certain nor guaranteed. It is estimated that about 97% of the 22,700 VBS retail depositors will receive all of their money. We are mindful that some retail depositors have larger amounts deposited in VBS. Together with the curator, the SARP and the Prudential Authority will continue to work towards recovering as much money owed to VBS as possible. Municipalities, larger businesses, and other corporate depositors will not receive any of their funds at this stage, as these are not guaranteed, but will retain their deposits in VBS. As the curatorship continues, the emphasis will shift to recovering monies owed to VBS. We urge all customers who have loans with VBS to continue paying their loans, as they are still legally obliged to do so. People may face penalties and other sanctions if they fail to pay monies owed to VBS. VBS customers are requested to continue issuing VBS infrastructure and branches to repay their loans. Forensic investigation. There has been extensive media coverage around VBS in recent weeks. In this respect, we wish to state the following. The forensic investigation led by Advocate Terry Mudau, SC, into possible fraud and malfeasance at VBS is still in progress. We expect the investigation to be completed by late August or early September this year. Initial findings of the investigations were made available to the curator by the South African Reserve Bank. The curator has used these preliminary findings from the investigation to launch urgent applications to take steps to recover monies owed to VBS. This took place on Friday, the 6th of July, 2018. This was a necessary action required by the curator to prevent the dissipation of assets belonging to VBS. Third, at a suitable time, evidence documented by the investigator will be handed over to law enforcement authorities and the South African Revenue Service. In the opinion of the curator, the 2017 financial statements of VBS did not present an accurate account of the mutual bank's financial position and are thus being restated. This process is likely to take a few more months. Only once this process has been completed can a definitive assessment be made about VBS's true financial position and the future of the mutual bank. Similarly, until these financial statements have been reissued, it is difficult to assess the amount of monies that may be recovered and what proportion of other depositors' funds is likely to be recovered. The SARP would like to thank the curator for his work so far. This has been a difficult curatorship, and the announcement today detailing the mechanisms to repay retail depositors will make his work easier though his work continues. The SARB would also like to thank Nedbank for agreeing to partner with the SARB to facilitate the return of retail depositors' funds. The repayment of retail depositors will go some way to ease the hardships suffered by many people over the past 4 months. We thank affected stakeholders for their cooperation and patience with the curatorship, and we call on clients of VBS to remain patient. We would like to stress that retail depositors will have access to all their funds at Nedbank branches up to a limit of 100,000 rands per retail depositor starting from Friday, the 13th of July, 2018. We appeal to people not to all rush at once to claim their funds as their deposits are secure. That concludes the statement, and at this stage I would like to turn to you for any questions that you might have. And as usual, please identify yourself and the media house that you represent, and we will distribute the questions here accordingly. Let's start here in the front. Yeah.
Governor, the name's Angelo Coppola from China Global Television. 3 questions for you. Could you give us the criteria that was used to select Nedbank as your partner in this endeavor? Secondly, what about bank charges? Are they going to be higher or lower than they were with VBS for your retail customers? And then thirdly, who collects the outstanding VBS loans? Is it going to be Nedbank's job or the curator's job? Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was another hand here in the front. Yes, sir.
Sorry. Dewald from Rensburg City Press. I have a few questions. Perhaps I shall leave some for later. First of all, do we have an estimate of the cost of this guarantee? I mean, how much money are we talking about for everyone under that limit? Do we have an estimate of retail deposits not covered by the new guarantee in money terms? And I suppose the question has to be, seeing what we've seen in the affidavit of Mr. Rupal last week, how on earth was this done without the SARB knowing or seeing in the course of last year? I mean, I think that's a fair question at this point.
What is this?
The bank, the way the bank was run, essentially fabricating deposits and so on. I mean, its reports to the SARB must have been entirely fabricated, one assumes.
Any other? Okay, sir. There is a button there, you press it, and then the microphone will, yes, like
thank
that.
You. Thank you, sir. My question is to...
name and...
sorry. My name is Konati Manchanja. I work for Financial Mail and Business Day. My question is for Mr. Rupla. What are the hopes of saving the bank as we stand? And the allegations you make in your affidavit, sir, has anybody been charged criminally for anything so far? And are those the alleged thieves, if we may use that term, are those the most high profile that you have identified so far, the directors of the bank? Any others that we may know of? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will let the curator go first, and to deal with Sikonati's questions, but in so doing, also deal with the question of the criteria you used to arrive at recommending Nedbank as a partner. Yeah, and then we will deal with that. And Naidu, if you could deal with the cost of the guarantees, that 300 odd million, and what has not been covered by that. So let's start with you, curator, and then I will take the few here.
Okay, thank you, Governor. In terms of the criteria, we came up with essentially predetermined criteria, objective criteria, in order to choose a payment medium or an entity to affect the payments to the depositors. The one was the locality. In other words, the institution had to have branches in close proximity to the current VBS branches. The last thing we want to do was to inconvenience our clients. The second aspect was around fees, and we looked across the board as to who would offer our clients similar or better fees. An important one is around the institution having the ability to offer similar products. In other words, the clients that VBS has are Stokvels, burial society. So does the qualifying institution have similar products? That was the other criteria. And I think the last criteria was is the institution must be a registered commercial bank. Those were amongst the 4 criteria that we looked at to objectively identify a suitable institution in order to effect payment to our depositors. In response to the other questions, there's 3 of them. What are the hopes of saving the bank? I think yes, in light of the affidavit and the filing that and the proceedings that I've instituted on Friday, I think it's important to understand perhaps that aspect. So as the curator, I have instituted civil legal proceedings in order to recover monies owing to the bank. One of my duties as a curator is to recover assets belonging to the bank. So I think it's important to understand that is a civil proceeding. As mentioned in the governor's address, the investigation is still ongoing, and whatever may come from there, will be passed to the Reserve Bank, who in turn passes information on to me for me to make a determination as to whether I pursue further people in terms of recovering monies due to the bank. And I think what's important is that my focus is to recover money owing to the bank. That then leads to the hopes of saving the bank. And I think one needs to put this into context. Clearly, when I commenced my duties as a curator, the issue then was a liquidity matter. It was one of a liquidity issue. And that was on 11th of March 2018. And naturally, the curatorship team geared itself to resolving or solving a liquidity crisis issue. During my assessments in those early weeks, I then uncovered various irregularities, governance breaches, major control weaknesses, and so forth. That then prompted me to request the Reserve Bank, the South African Reserve Bank, to initiate an investigation, and which was duly done. And that was around 13th April, if memory serves me correct. Naturally, that's been a process. It's been a long process. And that's attributable to the sheer scale of the fraud that has been identified. It involves the depth of the fraud, the workings of the fraud. There's a lot of related parties implicated and certain identified parties. So most certainly the individuals and the Vela entity that was identified are the starting points of recovering assets as far as the curator is aware. So in essence, the curatorship process has been significantly derailed by the fraud, and added to that, I did not have a set of credible set of financial statements to start off with. So that certainly helped derail the process. So we are not as confident as we were when we started the curatorship as to restoring the bank. We are now less confident, and that's where we stand at this point in time. Until such time that the financial statements can be restated, I will be in a better position to make a further assessment as to how can we restore the bank further. I think I've answered then the last question as to are there more high profile individuals. I think, as I've alluded to, as and when the investigator makes available information, I then would act on that to recover assets. Thank you.
Angela, you asked the question, who is going to do the collection? As we say in the statement, that the branches would be open, but not for withdrawal services. The bank is still under curatorship, and it is still responsible for the collection of or any outstanding monies due to the bank under the leadership of the curator. Van Rensburg, Naidu will deal with the cost of the curatorship. It's some 300 odd million, but he will give you the precise figure. You posed the question, how did this thing happen under the watch of the bank. Let's start from basic principles. Regulators don't run banks. Shareholders who create banks apply for a banking license, and there are particular regulations to adhere to, which are not just domestic regulations, but are a translation of international standards into domestic law. Let's be clear. What has been happening at VBS is fraud. The regulator is not there to be detecting whether an institution is being defrauded. The board and the management of an institution is supposed to have proper systems of controls and governance to make sure that fraud is detected, is prevented, and if it's detected, it is dealt with. Fraud is a crime. And in the same manner that when another crime takes place, you do not ask the law enforcement authorities, where were you when the crime took place? You can't ask the regulator. Fraud took place in VBS, where were you? Because you see, when fraud takes place, it becomes a law enforcement issue. And we can't even turn and say to the police, where were you? In institutions, it's important that there are systems and structures of governance to deter fraud, and in the event that fraud takes place, detect it and deal with it decisively. Of course, in this case, you are dealing with a difficult situation. From what the curator had been saying, you could see that some of the people that the curator is pursuing are the very people who were supposed to be watching over the institution. Members of the board, executive management of the bank. These are the people whose job it is to govern the institution and make sure that fraud does not take place. And in this case, it seems to be that there is evidence that they themselves, if they haven't committed the fraud, might be complicit in the fraud. There is a forensic investigation that is taking place, and I am sure we will be much wiser when it comes out. But I guess the subtext of your statement, where were you, could also be that, well, this bank has failed. Why didn't you prevent it from failing? Once again, regulators can't prevent a bank from failing. Regulators will enable a bank that is run recklessly to fail without pulling down the system. Our responsibility as regulators is to the depositors and to the banking system. And that is why today we stand here and we announce what we are doing for the depositors. That is what our responsibilities are. It's about the depositors. And why is it important that the regulators' focus should be on the depositors rather than on the shareholders or all the others? Is because take away depositors, there is no banking. There is no banking. All of you who want to borrow money, you want to borrow money from depositors. And that is why at the heart of the regulation of the banking sector is the protection of depositors. Once you do not have depositors, once depositors lose confidence in the system and they take their money out of the system, you do not have a system to talk about anymore, and we are all poorer after that. Naidu, I think I might have dealt with, if you must deal with the money and any other thing that I might have missed.
Two issues, Governor. The first is that the total amount guaranteed is about 336 million rand. The total retail deposits in VBS is somewhere around 360 to 370 million. The number is slightly imprecise because there were some deposits that were fraudulently created. So to the best of our calculations, let's call it 370 million for want of a hard number, which suggests that the amount of uncovered deposits is around 40-odd million, thereabout, that range. 97% of depositors by number will receive all of their money. Just one more issue, that when the investigation is completed, we will hand the investigation report over to the law enforcement authorities. The actions that the curator has taken is a civil matter. It's a civil proceeding aimed at recovering assets, monies owed to the bank. Once the investigation is concluded, we will hand it over for criminal sanctions if the prosecutors or the police think that there are criminal infringements.
Before that, Mr. Minele?
I think there might have been a question that we could have missed. There was an issue around the collection of remaining loans as such, and I think a quick point in that regard, the cooperation with Nedbank deals only with the deposits that are covered under the guarantee. Everything else, those amounts that are over and above the 100,000 limit, as well as loans that people have taken out at VBS, remain with VBS. There are obviously legal obligations that people need to deliver on. They need to service those loans and repay them, and that all stays with VBS, obviously under the direction of the curator, who's vested with the management powers at the moment.
Sir.
Good afternoon, Warren Thompson from Business Day. Just perhaps a question for the curator, Mr. Ruplal. Just spell it out for us, sir, if you can. What percentage of the balance sheet or the asset base of the bank are you actively trying to recover through the civil actions you've undertaken on Friday, as well as any other action you anticipate recovering? And then I also wanted to understand that since as the National Treasury now has had to pay up roughly 330 million rand to guarantee the deposits, is there any action being considered by the Reserve Bank or the National Treasury to sue the partners of KPMG or KPMG itself, as well as the bank's internal auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers, for what appears to be fairly gross negligence? And just a last question, Mr. Ruplal, you indicated the financials are going to be restated. Can you give us an indication how far back those might need to go, and whether or not the asset base that was reported in the most recent financials, if that figure was accurate, or think that's going to be restated as well? Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. Tsepo?
Good afternoon. Tsepo Mwai, SABC News. I just want to find out from the governor, should the bank fail, the guarantee that the government has put, is it going to be lost? Is it not going to be recovered? And the second question is on the budget for the curatorship. How much? It looks like there's still a lot of work that still needs to be done. How much is the budget, and how much is it still going to be needed? Yeah, and then the last question is on mutual banks. Will things change going forward for those who want to apply for mutual bank license? Thanks.
Any other new hand before I go back to Van Rensburg? Okay.
Sorry, just one question for Mr. Ruplal. Your affidavit is largely based on an affidavit by the former treasurer of VBS, who has turned on his fellows, so to speak. What is the arrangement precisely there? Because he implicates himself in a great deal of crime. I mean, is he protected somehow? What's the deal, if I may put it that way?
Any others? Yes, Kosnash.
Can you tell us, Mr. Ruplal, if the major those people who hold loans, like the high-profile 7.9 million rand loan to Jacob Zuma, are they at all performing? And I know, of course, there's very big loans that were handed out by the bank. Is any of those people paying back the money? Thank you.
Is that it? Okay. Curator, you're very popular this afternoon.
Okay, in terms of the size of the balance sheet, in my affidavit, the curator is looking to recover amounts of approximately 1.5 billion, because that, per the analysis and the information made available to me from the investigator, amounts of approximately 1.5 billion has been siphoned out of the bank. So clearly that's the amount that we are looking to recover. With regards to questions around KPMG and PwC, my comments are general comments in this regard, and I think as the Governor has alluded to as well, the Board of Directors has a duty, vested management has a duty to protect their interests and act in fiduciary capacities, and so forth. And clearly the risk management function is an important function in a bank. Likewise, your external assurance providers, KPMG being external auditors and PwC being internal auditors, yes, clearly that's an important function as well. As to whether we would sue them or not, again, that would be driven by the findings that will come out of further from the investigation, and those clearly has to be assessed. Matters like independence of the service providers, the ability to raise the flags early, so forth, those are the factors that are of concern to me. And one could argue, yes, these matters should have been picked up. But clearly, this is something that we will and are looking further into. At this point in time, I can't really comment further as to what legal action will be taken. I will heed advice from the investigator and my legal team in conjunction with the Reserve Bank as well. In terms of restating the financial statements, how far back do we go? I think this has been a challenge of note, this curatorship. And as mentioned, I did not have a credible starting point. So 2017, most clearly I have to restate because I need a baseline. I need a point of reference. And from there we will reconstruct and see what the 2018 looks like. One needs to get to the truth in the numbers, and to get there it takes time and effort. And the process, I've got to follow due process to make sure I get to the right numbers. So that is going to take some time, to say the least. I will then assess whether it's feasible or not to restate years before that, because the cost benefit of that one needs to assess and weigh that. I think I'll ask Kuben, Deputy Governor, to assist me on matters around curatorship budget and mutual bank licenses. I think those are more for...
Yeah, they are for him, yes, you are right.
Thank you, Chair.
Sure, thanks. Just the first issue is that whether the bank fails or not will not determine whether the guarantee is called. Whether we can't collect sufficient assets to repay the Treasury, that will determine whether the guarantee is called. If you take the total amount of deposits in the bank and the total amount of loans in the bank, even if conservatively stated, we're quite optimistic that there are some good loans in there. There's what I would call a traditional mortgage loan book, in some ways the old traditional business of VBS. Many of those loans are performing. So we're quite confident that we will not have to tap taxpayers' money, but I can't say that for certain. Once the process of recovering loans is well underway, I think we'll be able to get a better sense of whether that guarantee is at risk. There is a risk, certainly. Our view at this stage is that there are sufficient quality assets to be able to recover the 336 million rand in the guarantee. The budget for the curatorship differs from month to month. On average, it's around 2.5 to 3 million a month. And that's not just for the curator, that's for an entire team of people, team of about 20 people, including accountants, IT people, security people, etc., to be able to manage the curatorship, the legal processes, all of that. the law says that the curatorship, the cost of the curatorship should be recovered from the bank. So that is the position at this stage. What's the budget going forward? My guess is that there'll be a significant reduction in cost now that the requirement to pay over retail deposits is taken away. That was a significant share of the costs of the curatorship. But I don't have a clearer sense going forward on what those numbers are. I think it will come down. On mutual banks I think they have a place in the system. They're designed for a relatively small community-based scheme where depositors own the bank. In our view, VBS got too big to be regulated through the Mutual Banks Act. And over the last 2 years, we repeatedly asked them to apply for a commercial banking license. What would be nice is if in law there was the provision for the regulator to insist that they upgrade to a bigger license once their size increased. But for a relatively small bank, I mean, we've got other mutual banks that are around fairly well, community-based type institutions. I think there's a place for them. I think what is unhealthy is when you get what I would call regulatory arbitrage. You use the Mutual Banks Act as a legal framework to effectively run the operations of a commercial bank. I think that that's an unlevel playing field. And in an ideal world, the regulators should have the legal instruments to be able to insist that a bank upgrades its license so that there is a more intrusive framework for licensing and for regulating them. There was a question from Kosanati about loans to high-profile people. I think Anush will give you the same answer I'll give you, that we're not going to mention names of people involved. That's not fair. There's certainly client confidentiality in relation to the bank that we would like to protect unless there's a specific legal action against an individual and therefore it'll come out in court. We're not going to name any high-profile people who have loans or report on whether any particular individual is paying their loans or not.
Just to underscore that the forensic investigation is continuing. We would like to get clarity from that investigation so that appropriate action can be taken. And that appropriate action, as we had stated, would entail reporting to the South African Revenue Services. You know that you might receive a bribe. If you have received a bribe, it is income. South African Revenue Services can tax it, even if it is a bribe. And secondly, we have got reason to believe that fraud has been committed in this bank, and to the extent that we are able to establish that fraud has been committed, we will hand that information to the law enforcement authorities, and hopefully prosecution successfully so takes place. Lastly, I just wanted to state that as the Deputy Governor Naidu stated that the guarantee, as far as we are concerned, it's covered or will be covered by enough quality assets in the bank, that we must understand that the Treasury has not put the money. It's the Reserve Bank that has put the money on the strength of the guarantee of the Treasury. And it might be a few years down the line, depending on how much of the assets have been recovered, that we would know whether a portion of that guarantee would actually be called. At the moment, as Naidu said, we think that there might be enough assets to cover it. But to the extent that those assets are not realized, or it takes time to realize them, it could take a while before that happens. I thought those were the last questions I had asked. But, okay, I'm taking absolutely the last round of questions. Any new hands? Yes, ma'am, you are new.
Governor, thanks for the opportunity. It's Anna Montero from Bloomberg News. So today's announcement pertains to the retail depositors. I was just wondering if there were any plans afoot to help the 13 municipalities that have more than 1 billion rand invested in VBS. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Susanna?
Please confirm VBS Future. Is the bank going to be closed and any job losses? His second question is, how many clients do you estimate will be migrated to Nedbank due to this process? And how much will Governor make available for this process? I think that's been answered.
Warren?
Thanks, Governor. Just certainly take your point on the fact that the regulator never advertises to be at the crime when it takes place. But certainly, from the Reserve Bank's point of view, and certainly an institution I think that prides itself on the strength of our banking system, has this given you pause for thought yet as to perhaps how the regulator can do its job better? Stopping short of actually going and auditing the banks yourself. Is there perhaps a weakness or a blind spot in your risk analysis and the way the work of the bank is done that you think can be improved from this lesson? Thank you.
Van Rensburg.
Sorry. I'm not sure I caught the answer about the Treasurer and his affidavit and whether there's some kind of dispensation for him. And following on what Mr. Naidu said about regulatory arbitrage, what was it that triggered, at what point did you think that they should stop being a mutual bank? Because we know there's plans afoot to also use the mutual bank structure to create a branchless bank by some well-known entrepreneurs in the country, for instance. Is there a level of deposits where it's no longer, what is the point where it shouldn't be used?
Okay, thank you very much. Bloomberg, plans for the municipalities. Our duty is to the retail depositors. Municipalities had no business placing deposits with VBS. They knew they are breaking the law. They did it anyway. And even after the Treasury issued a circular that said, it has come to our attention that some of you are placing deposits with a mutual bank. We refer you to the Finance Management Act that says that you cannot place deposit with any other bank other than a commercial bank. You went ahead and you did it. What actually happened after that circular is that even more was placed with the deposit. So we take it that these were the people, these were institutions like the corporates who knew what they were doing, had all the capability to do their own due diligence. They knew what they were doing, and they will have to stand their line in the queue as we look at whether there are enough assets to cover everybody. They would have to put their requests through the estate. Wall Street Journal with VBS be closed. Well, I wish you were here. No, we have not said that it would be closed. Well, with all that we had said was that when we put this bank under curatorship, we were fairly confident that the bank would make it through. And we said that we are less confident now. What makes us less confident now is because, as the curator said, that the financials of 2017 would have to be restated. And until that restatement has taken place, we would not be able to take a position or view as to whether this will be able to continue as a bank. How many clients? Well, VBS had 22,700 clients. 97% of them would be able to recover their full deposits with VBS. And then Warren, doing better, yes. We always think we can do better, but we are doing very well. If you were to take this just based on the municipal deposits, this is a 1.5 billion rands bank. the assets of the South African banking system are about 12 trillion rand. 12 trillion rand. So by any measure, this bank, if you were to measure whether it is systemic or not, and you were to apply the criteria of whether it is size, whether it is complexity, whether it is interconnectedness, this is not a bank that would have a knock on the financial system. Nevertheless, it is a bank that served a very important segment of our community. And it is for that reason, like that, when we looked at this and we said that these are people who normally in our settings here in the urban areas, we would say, oh, these people can save, they do not have money. These are people who were able to mobilize their savings. And it's just a travesty that the failure of management in VBS put these deposits at risk. Fortunately, we were able to step in and that we could save 97% of these depositors.